Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the 57th Commission of the Status of Women, and this is a very, very important topic, discussing preventing gender-based violence by strongly supporting gender equality and mutual respect. Boys also have to understand at an early age how to respect girls, whether it's their sisters, their mothers, their grandmothers. They need to know how to respect the girl. And I want to introduce Dr. Christina Blanc. She's an MA and PhD in anthropology. She went to Chicago University for MA. She got her PhD in anthropology from Columbia University. Dr. Blanc-Stanton has had a prominent career as an academic, teaching at Columbia University, Barnard College, and the New School for Social Research, and publishing numerous books and peer-review articles on changing family and gender roles, economic, anthropology, and ethnic relations over the years. She was a board member and headed the Southeast Asia Council of the Association for Asian Studies. She's a Life Fellow of American Anthropological Association and a co-author of Nations Unbound, Transnational Projects, Post-Colonial Predicaments, and Deteriorized Nation States. Deteriorized nation states.
Outside the territory.
Yeah, I understand what it means. With Linda Bosch and Nina Glick Schiller, Gordon and Breach, still actively used in college and graduate teachings. Dr. Christina Blanc-Stanton has taught gender roles theory and women in development for 15 years at Columbia University School for International Affairs, as well as to PhD graduate students at the New School for Social Research. She has published numerous articles from the late 1970s to the present day on changing gender roles in the Philippines, Thailand, India, Brazil, Kenya, and Italy. An anthropologist with long-term experience in the formulation and assessment of development projects in developing world. She has analyzed and evaluated programs for the Ford Foundation, USAID, and Chulalongkorn University, the International Center for Research on Women, and UNICEF, amongst others. In the 1990s, she became the coordinator of the 5-Century Urban Child Project of the UNICEF International Child Development Center, a project which lasted for 5 years, generated multiple publications in different languages, worked with over 70 consultants around the world, and resulted in a book she authorized with contributors, Urban Children in Distress, Global Predicaments and Innovative Strategies, Gordon and Branch, 1994. More recently, she has also been a vibrant advocate for children and youth and a former co-chair for the 12 years of the NGO Committee of the Children's Rights of the United Nations. I present to you Dr. Christina Blanc-Stanton.
Mine will be just brief welcoming remarks rather than a presentation, but I thought we had organized this meeting hoping to have with us members of the International Center for Research on Women. I don't know how many of you have heard their presentations during the first 2 days. They were active part of the discussion. But unfortunately today they were organizing their own meeting in Washington, so there was no way I could have them. Wrong schedule. So I would like to present you as CRW very briefly, because I think we should all refer to their work, which is quite earth-breaking in many ways. They believe very strongly. The ICRW started in 1976. They have offices in South America and India. They believe very strongly that you do need information to be effective advocates, and they gather that kind of information, specifically on gender roles. And they have in in different versions, also emphasized the position of boys with respect to girls, analyzing the content of masculinity in different parts of the world. What does it mean to people who live there? Because it does mean actually very different things. And we kind of assume we know from what we know from where we are coming from, but it doesn't imply real knowledge unless somebody goes to explore it where it is. And so I have a great respect for their work because I think they do very good social science and would love them to be better known and appreciated. They have a website which is easily reachable, a lot of publications that will be referred to by different speakers. And Gary Barker, for example, who is now moved to Promundo, which is an organization he created, was the first whom I've seen analyzing the role of boys, much before it became fashionable around here. So he has a long trend of good work in this area. The center generally works to make women in developing countries an integral part of validating global poverty. So they do believe in the basic tenets of the work on women. But they focus on responding to issues and utilizing the presence, our increasing awareness of human rights, which I think is a major blocking stone for what we might want to do. The fact that human rights is becoming more widely known, that democracy is expanding its realm, that we have now the potential to anchor in arguments for respect of each individual child, whatever the gender, on something that is starting to surround us. And that's usually a perfect way to start change, because you need some common basis in the way people think about something before you can actually push them to change. And we do have now, in this 21st century, that common base. So the second part of what I will do is to urge people to start working very intensely, and I think it's the next step for the women's movement, and they may have stated that in the sessions at the beginning of them, but we need to start attacking the core tenets of inequality very frontally. Not just because we know that there is an inequality and we know that it's hard to change and all of the arguments that you hear. And when I say this, and I say it with vehemency at times, people say, oh, but it's always been there. What do you want to do about it? We need to sort of... And the end result is that everybody talks about the bad things that are happening, and nobody talks about what we could do to make it different. And that's where I would like to put my weight and tell you a few things about why I think it is possible. One is the surrounding setting that has changed. The other thing is that gender, which is actually really the word is acknowledged by Wikipedia as having emerged with feminism in the 1970s. None of these things are old-time concepts. Gender is very much a construct, and I can assure you of that because that's what anthropologists have started studying, and nobody acknowledges. I mean, I've been reading things over it. Psychologists say, oh, it's ours. And everybody says it's their discipline. But historically, I can promise you, because I was teaching this 30 years ago, and the psychologists had not even entered the field of gender very much yet at that time. It has been created by the concern for kinship. That is the tenet, the core of the work of anthropologists. Anthropology was famous because it went from countries to countries, mostly colonial countries, and it got tainted a bit by being involved with the colonial powers. It went to examine why the countries were different. And the core tenet of most social groups is kinship, is how they hold together and educate and assemble men and women and educate their children. And so anthropologists study different kinds of kinship systems, and they are all constructions, because you jump from one country to another and they are totally different. People constructed them over time. And we need to liberate our mind from it being natural. None of it is natural. It has been constructed historically, and we have the potential to change it, precisely because it is a construct that kids learn when they grow up. And we need to impress on them that that is a fact. And this is the second portion of what I wanted to tell you very much. ACRW has worked on two major projects. One is the GEMS project, which was the background for our particular panel. The other one is the Images project, which was a household questionnaire on men's attitudes and practices, along with females' opinions and female reports of men's practices, that was done in, 6 countries. And some other speakers will mention them briefly. So an encouragement to become aware with ACRW, and a strong encouragement to believe, to start believing that we can change these gender constructs. And with that, I'll pass on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Christina.
You're welcome, guys.
Our next presenter, her title is Planting the Seeds, Taking Steps Towards Large-Scale Change. Sarah B. Aaron, she's with Children's Aid Society. She's a social worker. She currently serves as an administrative supervisor of the Family Wellness Program at the Children's Aid Society of New York City. The Family Wellness Program provides comprehensive domestic violence prevention and intervention services for children, teens, and adults who are affected by domestic violence or relationship abuse. Ms. Aaron manages several contracts for the provision of non-residential domestic violence advocacy, counseling, case management, and educational services for teens and adults. She also provides training and consultation for child welfare professionals throughout New York City on the intersection of domestic violence and child welfare. In previous roles at Children's Aid, Ms. Aaron has provided group and individual counseling, advocacy and case management, services to teens, adults impacted by domestic violence and relationship abuse. Prior to working at Children's Aid, Ms. Aaron gained experience with the YWCA and St. Louis Regional Sexual Assault Center, providing sexuality education to teens and adults. She also worked with the St. Louis area Planned Parenthood, providing sexuality education to teens and helping them to further develop their teen peer leadership program. Ms. Aaron received her master's in social work from Washington University in St. Louis. The Family Wellness Program's goal is to help individuals and families that have experienced physical, emotional, or other forms of abuse to establish long-term safety and heal from the efforts of abuse. This goal is the same whether the family members have chosen to separate or to remain together. While we have a particular focus on supporting families involved in the child welfare system, we welcome any parent interested in developing healthier relationships for the sake of themselves, their children, and their families. I present to you Sarah Aaron.
Thank you. And thank you all for being here, and for you all for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. And I will try to speak quickly because we have so little time and so much to talk about. So where I really want to start off now is just jumping off of what Dr. Blanc was just talking about changing the construct of gender, not only because she thinks we can, but because we already have. That was the other thing that kept sort of ringing in my head, is that even though there is still a large disparity here in the US and in other countries around the world, we have seen changes in the way that gender has been constructed over time. And I think that that's also really promising as we continue to make even greater strides. So what I wanted to talk about a little bit today is sort of looking at where we are in doing this sort of gender-based violence prevention work here in the US and in New York City specifically, since that's where I work, and then where we want to be relative to where we are, and then talk a little bit about kind of what I call planting the seeds, which I think is the work that we do in my program now, sort of as we work towards this larger scale change, how we can be doing secondary prevention and primary prevention and intervention all concurrently so that we're prepared and we've sort of laid the groundwork for these bigger change projects. So I wanted to start off with a few statistics. So on average, in the United States, 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner, which is more than 12 million women and men over the course of a single year here in the United States, right? That's huge, and that's only talking about physical violence, right? We haven't even started to address other types of emotional, verbal, financial abuse, things that we know happen particularly in intimate partner relationships. So that's looking at adults. When we start looking at young people, adolescents, nationwide, about 9.4% of high school students report being hit, slapped, or physically hurt on purpose by their boyfriend or girlfriend within the last 12 months. And that statistic is very similar here in New York City. So 1 in 10 teenagers here in the city report experiencing physical or sexual violence in a dating relationship within the past year. So again, that's only looking at within the last year from when they're being asked the question, and it's only looking at physical violence. I often, when I go and do presentations to roomfuls of teens, I ask them, what would they guess? What did they guess the percentage is of young people who experience dating violence or intimate partner violence? And they usually guess somewhere between 70 to 90%. So that to me tells me two things. One, that it's probably very much underreported in the research, which I think is not going to surprise anyone here. And two, it's happening so much that they think everyone they know is dealing with it. That if not them, somebody else that they know closely is dealing with some sort of abuse within their intimate relationship. And these are primarily middle school and high school students. So in case you needed convincing, the problem is big. So I think right now where we are in the work, we're definitely moving towards a message of gender equality, and I think there's a much greater sense of equality between boys and girls, men and women here in the States. And there's still room to grow, but there's still a very strong message of violence as being acceptable, violence of all types. So one of the sort of interesting things we've seen shift is that girls have a greater sense of their own power, which is great, but then we see sort of what people are categorizing as mutual violence happening in relationships. So girls are saying to us, well, yeah, my boyfriend hit me, but I hit him back. And people are having a hard time identifying then who's the primary aggressor, what's happening there. Is it related to gender, or maybe it's not? Maybe it's just a violence issue. And I think the issue starts to become clouded for people as the sort of gender roles become more equal. I think we also need to be even more savvy in the way we explain to people what are still the inequalities that are there, because we know that they're there, and helping young people and adults really understand what that's about. I think sort of where we are as organizations and programs trying to do this prevention work, I think we're doing a lot of raising awareness and education, but our depth is limited. So we need more time with the same audience. I think a lot of the programs are doing, there's a lot of things that are online, so there's educational information available online about what gender-based violence is, and there are programs that kind of come in and they'll do a one-session workshop, and so it's raising awareness and educating people, but I think we really need programs like GEMS, which focus really on in-depth work in a particular community. So going into a school setting, working particularly with those young people over time so that they're getting an ongoing message that's also supported by the staff in the school. Ideally, I think, and there are some programs here in the States that are doing this, where they, in addition to being in the school community, they start doing even larger outreach to that community. So working with the parents, working with other community-based centers so that the kids are getting messages across the board from all of the adults in their lives, and they're reinforcing those positive messages to each other as well about gender equality, healthy relationships, nonviolence, all of those things. So very quickly, and this is on the handouts of the PowerPoint I had pulled together, so some of the websites I was talking about are loveisrespect.org and Break the Cycle, which actually there was a partnership between Break the Cycle and then the National Dating Abuse Helpline that created Love is Respect. So if you go onto the loveisrespect.org website, it will provide you tons of teen-specific information about gender-based violence, about dating violence, and it creates this confidential, safe space where young people can both access information and get assistance. So they have a 24-hour hotline that's run where you can get assistance, and you can also do it through the web. So it's really tech-savvy, I think, and important that we're keeping up with technology and where young people are at. So they can go on, they can do online chat with a peer and talk about their dating relationship or talk about questions they have about gender and relationships. And those programs work exclusively on teen dating violence prevention and intervention as opposed to, with the larger population of teens and adults. And then we have a handful of organizations that are really focusing on boys and men. So Futures Without Violence has a program called Coaching Boys into Men. There's another program that's called Mentors in Violence Prevention. And they do a lot of targeting athletic programs, which I think is really smart. So some of it is about thinking about who your audience is, who do you want to target, and where do you find them. So really looking at, okay, this is where the young men and boys are, so let's go here. So they work with the coaches and with the student athletes themselves and have educational workshops and programming to talk about what does it mean to be a man, what is masculinity, how should men and boys be treating women and girls in their lives. There's also programs like A Call to Men and Men Can Stop Rape, which do some sort of more direct education, and also I think they do some really great media campaigns and awareness and consciousness raising type work. And then we have, like I was referencing before, there are a few programs that are starting to sort of pilot things that look a little bit like the GEMS programs. So the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, it's sort of midway through the process of testing this really comprehensive, multi-level teen dating violence prevention approach. So you can go online and they have resources, and you can do an online training about how to do education with young people. And they are going into communities and trying to figure out sort of what is the most effective and also the most cost effective, which I think is really smart because we know it's really hard to get funding for prevention in general. There's also a program called Start Strong. And that I see somebody nodding in the audience, yay! So they've piloted a program in 11 different communities throughout the U.S., and one of those is here in New York in the Bronx. And they're really focused on educating and working with middle school students and engaging those students and their larger communities. So they're going in, they're changing school policy, they're educating the young people, educating the parents. And it seems like a really smart approach. I haven't yet seen, I expect that there will be data coming out of that. I haven't seen it yet to sort of measure the effectiveness, measure attitude change and behavior change. So fingers crossed that is all going well. And then sort of here in New York City specifically, we have a small handful of programs that work specifically with young people. So in addition to the program where I work, we have Day One, which is the only service provider here in New York City that works exclusively with teens on the issue of dating violence. So they provide direct services, they provide legal support and counseling, and they also do community education. They have what they call the Youth Voices Network, which is like a speakers bureau. So survivors of teen dating violence can go out and tell their story, which I think is hugely powerful and really helpful to teach other young people. I think, teaching your peers goes so much further than if I get into a room and try to talk to a young person about healthy relationships and dating violence. We have a program called the Relationship Abuse Prevention Program, or RAP for short, which is, again, a school-based prevention and intervention program. So it puts a social worker in a New York City public school, and they do workshops, they run groups, and they also do some individual counseling, educating young people about healthy and unhealthy relationships. And then here at the mayor's office in New York City, there's what they call the Healthy Relationships Training Academy. And that's actually youth-facilitated workshops, which, again, I think is really smart. So they train a group of young people to be peer leaders, basically, and to go out and do workshops for both young people and also for adults who work with young people. So I think that's also really smart, right? So instead of adults talking to other adults are hearing directly from young people. Here's how you can help us learn to have healthier relationships. Here's how you can help us learn to address issues of gender and violence. So sort of the where do we want to be question, for me, right, we want sort of overall, we want gender equality, we want violence to be unacceptable, and we want to have people view violence against women and girls by boys and men as a human rights issue, like Dr. Blanc was saying earlier. And I think that's really important. I think it's something we definitely try to talk about in the workshops we do with young people, to help sort of compare sexism and gender disparity to other kinds of isms, right? So how is sexism sort of like racism or sort of like classism? Young people are very concrete thinkers developmentally, so helping them sort of understand that it's bigger than just you and the other person, but that there's this context in which all of these things are happening. So to my mind, I think achieving this level of change where, violence is no longer acceptable and all the genders are seen as equal, I think that's going to require an investment of time, resources, funding, and will require a really holistic approach that includes primary prevention models. So for me, the idea about planting the seeds is what are the other things we can be doing on different levels in the meantime. I just want to speak very quickly about the program where I work, which is called the Family Wellness Program, and our Teens Against Relationship Abuse program, which is our teen-specific services. So we provide educational workshops for young people, and in those programs we really try to help them develop what I like to call their filter about how to think about all the messages they're getting all the time. So we talk about where do you get messages about gender and about relationships, and they say from my parents, from the media, from my friends, from wherever, and then we talk about, okay, so are you just going to let those all come in, or are you going to think about them a little bit? And so we try to teach the skills for critical thinking about gender and violence. We try to help them develop their own values for healthy relationships, and help them learn to identify unhealthy behaviors in their relationships and those of their peers so that they can intervene and make change. And our individual counseling services is somewhat similar ideas. We work with young people who have both been exposed to violence at home, who have experienced violence in their own intimate relationships, and sometimes it's both, right? And we also work with young people who may have been abusive towards their intimate partner, and to help all of them learn new skills, new ways of behaving, and to help them sort of define for themselves, what are my relationship values, what do I think is healthy, and then how do I get that out of my relationship? And then within our program, more largely, we do work with whole families. So we might be working with a young person and providing them individual counseling, and we may also have their mom in a group for survivors of domestic violence. We might have their dad in a group for men who've been abusive, so that all members of the family are learning new skills and behaviors at once, and hopefully we are sort of breaking the cycle so that the violence doesn't repeat itself, so that those children don't grow up to become abusive, so that hopefully perhaps an abusive person that we're working with in his next relationship will have learned new skills and will not become abusive. Or perhaps if those people are looking to work together, I've gone too far. My apologies. Okay, change is possible. And I think my bottom line is that there's many faces to gender-based violence prevention, and we need to be working on multiple fronts. And I will wrap it up there. My apologies.
Thank you so very much, Sarah. Thank you very, very much.
Very nice overview of
Thank you very,
what is
very much.
happening
We
here.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Terry Lee. She's a singer-songwriter, and her title of her speech is Rise Up, and she also wrote a song called Rise Up for this particular event. And she's also an intern with my organization, with Women Beyond Survival, and has truly gone beyond survival to care for her 2 daughters. She sought music as a tremendous way of healing and letting the world know who she is. Her ability to write songs can be traced from her birth father, singer-songwriter Roger Koob, who sang with the Premiers, the Frontiers, and Roger and the Travelers, and is the author of tunes from 50s, 60s, such as Your Daddy's Little Girl and I Who Have Nothing. Terry Lee's style is a unique blend of folk, country, alternative jazz, and pop rock. Her formal training began with organ lessons, starting at the age of 8. By age 10, she had written her first song and was the church organist at a Blessed Sacrament of Saugus Mass. During the 90s, Terry Lee joined the Connecticut Songwriters Association and the Boston Songwriters Workshop. She also became a lead singer for a classic rock cover band, Hard Drive. In 2003, she was a lead singer, keyboard player for the cover band The Barflies. Lee was one of the 3 founding members of the North Shore Community College's First Music Club. Later, she became a member of Salem State's College Music Society, the Salem State College Jazz Band, the Salem State College Chamber Singers, and Salem State College Women's Choral. In 2007, Lee won awards for 8 of her original songs in the Song of the Year contest sponsored by VH1. In 2009, Terry Lee created WeCam, We Care About Music, in order to provide strength support for the artist community. The goal of WeCam is to provide support for local musicians, writers, artists, and local businesses, uniting them to promote peace within their community. WeCam views creativity as an essential aspect of daily life and is committed to helping local musicians, artists, and writers share their talent and their skill in their community. I present to you Terry Lee.
Greetings from Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you, Sophia, for inviting me to speak at this event. It's an honor to be here. As a working mother, business owner, and student, I'm a firm believer in gender equality, that men and women, although different in many ways, should be treated with fairness and equality, starting from when they are girls and boys. This behavior is something that first must be taught at home and reinforced in school as well as in the local community. These days, we are all bombarded with subliminal as well as blatant messages that show men's superiority and women's inferiority. For example, through commercials and ads, and images trying to depict women as sex objects being dominated by men. And this encourages violence. That's why it is so important that the youth must be educated and informed that this is a false message and unacceptable view. And we must teach them by our words and example of the importance of standing up and taking action for what is right. Because every time we witness an injustice and we do not act, we are training our own character to be passive in its presence, and eventually we lose our ability to defend ourselves and those we love. And I am a testimony of the importance of speaking up. During the summer of 2010, I had a very unfortunate experience. One night, after a show that I had booked, I met someone who raped me. And even though I was able to break free and scream for help, he did run off. And I really wanted to go home and cry and forget about the whole thing. But instead, I called a friend, and she encouraged me to call the police. And I reported the incident, went to the hospital, went through the whole rape kit process. And within 3 days, they arrested the man who was a level 3 sex offender that had just been released out on parole after offending 3 times. Now he's been held without bail since that time, and actually next month it will go to trial. And even though I'm not looking forward to talking about it, nor facing my rapist or his attorney in court, I'm willing to go through it because I believe it is the right thing to do, and I have a responsibility to speak up about what happened and to try to protect the community and hopefully prevent future victims. Gloria Steinem, a woman activist and writer, said, "Whenever one woman stands up and says this is wrong, it helps others to do the same." I firmly believe that this is true, and I've reinforced this with both of my daughters. I've encouraged them to speak up and talk to me about anything and everything. And as a result of the open communication, I've been informed of various injustices that have happened against my daughters, like bullying in school, and even one of my daughters was molested. And as a parent, I have provided immediate support for my daughters, as well as contacted the school officials and authorities to properly deal with those situations and provide immediate protection for my children and the consequences for the offender. We can't live in a bubble, although we can try our best to protect our young as much as possible, but we can't be with them everywhere and do everything for them. That's why it is so important that we educate and equip them with skills so they know first how to recognize and respond to a negative situation, and then have the courage to speak up, ask for help, knowing that they will have our support. As a singer and songwriter, I've been able to express my feelings and thoughts through words and music. That has helped me as a person to identify my fears, any negative feelings, and deal with them as part of the healing process. I did write a song called Rise Up, which I wrote to kind of encourage myself as well as others to do what you know is right in your heart, regardless of the pressure around you. And I would like to be able to read the lyrics, if you don't mind. Don't sit there waiting for something to happen. Don't wait for things to change on their own. Sorry, but no, you have to reach for it, even if you're reaching alone. Rise up, reach for the sky. Rise up, you've got to try. Name it, claim it, there's power in the words you say. Conceive it, believe it. You've got to hope and pray. There are no limits except for what's in your mind. Seek it, and then you will find. Rise up, reach for the sky. Rise up, you've got to try. Set your face towards the sun. It shines for everyone. And you can shine bright once touched by the light. Then you'll have strength to arise. Rise up, reach for the sky. Rise up, you've got to try. Now for me, writing has helped me put what's inside, get it on paper, and then share the message. And this is my message for today, and that is that we can't just sit there waiting for something to change, waiting for somebody else to do something and solve the problems that we see around us. We need to be the people that do something. We need to rise up and not be afraid to speak up about things that are happening that are wrong and need to change. We need to have that fighting spirit, not in a mean, violent way, but fighting for good for ourselves and for our children and our youth. We need to be willing to teach them by our own example, as well as our words, to fight for what is right. Though sometimes bad things can happen and we may get hurt, we don't have to remain a victim. We can do more than just survive. We can heal, we can grow, and we can thrive. Because no matter what anyone might say or try to do or even try to take from us, they can't take away our own self-respect and our dignity, because it's inside, as long as we're not willing to give it up. So let's continue to fight, teach our youth to be strong and courageous and have self-respect, as well as show respect towards others, regardless of their gender, for we are all of equal value and should be treated fairly.
Terry, thank you for that very inspiring message for everybody to understand. Rise up, no matter what your circumstances are. And now our next speaker is Nicole Zivkovic, and she's going to talk about violence against women in the Balkans and look into the roles of men and boys. Nikki.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is both a pleasure and an honor to be speaking here today regarding the 57th Commission on the Status of Women. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Nothing in life is more dangerous than sincere ignorance," and I could not agree more. I've been moderating, presenting, and speaking at the United Nations since I was 9 years old. As both young and a girl, I feel a responsibility to be informed of world issues and to make a difference in the world that surrounds me. I also believe the only way to rightfully have an opinion on a matter is if you know what you're talking about. For that reason, I've chosen an area in the world that I feel most comfortable with. The Balkan Peninsula is an area of southeastern Europe surrounded by water on three sides. The Adriatic Sea to the west, the Mediterranean and Marmara Sea to the east, and the Black Sea to the south. It is an extremely popular tourist spot that is known for its beautiful beaches, landscape, and history. The countries included in this area are Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Greece, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Italy, Romania, Slovenia, Turkey, and Croatia. Today, my primary focus will be on violence against women in Croatia. As a fairly young country, Croatia's rise to independence was a rough one, and one that was witnessed by many still living today. Only gaining this independence in 1995, and after a 4-year war, Croatia was left with extreme economic burden and a government that was not stable, to say the least. After the war, due to the high percentage of unemployment and the poor economy, an increase in alcoholism and violence were some of the most noticeable after effects. But specifically looking at women, poverty, rape, homelessness, and displacement were not uncommon. To their teachers, parents, and friends, Tanya and Mario seemed to be typical high school sweethearts. But after a few months of dating, Mario became increasingly possessive and jealous, demanding to know where Tanya was at all times, and telling her to stop dressing like a whore if she ever wore a low-cut shirt. One night, at a friend's birthday party, he saw her talking to other boys and flew into a rage, slapping her hard enough to make her fall across a nearby table. Tanya and Mario are fictional characters in a small hardcover booklet, packaged like a chocolate bar and distributed to Croatian teens in schools and youth centers. Although the two may not be real, the abuse depicted in their story is. The worst part is how common situations like these are in patriarchal societies in the Balkans. This mistreatment of women in the area is not a result of just post-war struggles. This act of unjust abuse has a few other contributing factors. The International Men and Gender Equality Survey, otherwise known as IMAGES, was a 3-year study that consisted of nearly 12,000 interviews with men and women ages 18 to 59 in Croatia and 5 other countries regarding health practices, parenting, relationship dynamics, sexual behavior, and use of violence. IMAGES has been an incredible source of information regarding possible reasons why men lash out in violence against their intimate partners. Results across all countries showed that men who generally view themselves as superior to women are more likely to report physical and sexual violence against an intimate partner. The same was true for men who abused alcohol, witnessed violence in their childhood home, and felt stressed about work or income. While this is not entirely news to us, it gives us a lot of insight into the mindset of the men in these countries. The problem in these areas is that abuse against women and children is oftentimes seen as a social norm. And because young boys in these areas witness their fathers abusing their mothers at a young age, they do not realize the extent of how wrong it is. Whether the prompting is post-war struggles, drug or alcohol abuse, or merely the fact that some men cannot handle women in superior positions, domestic violence has become much too common, and the change must occur in the younger generations. As of right now, there are some laws against domestic violence against women and children, but it is also imperative that we ask ourselves if these laws are actually working, and if they're being implemented at all. According to the IMAGES report, between 88 and 96% of men surveyed said they knew about laws related to violence against women in their countries. However, this does not correlate with a decrease in their use of violence against their wives or girlfriends. In 2003, Croatia established a governmental office for gender equality, intended to coordinate and track all government efforts in women's rights and gender equality. The first Croatian Gender Equality Act was passed on July 18, 2003, and the new Croatian Gender Equality Act on July 15, 2008. The 2008 Act, which built upon the first, protects citizens against discrimination on the basis of sex, marital status, familial status, and sexual orientation. But to what extent are these legislations actually working? There was an increase in reported domestic violence incidents from 7,200 in 2002 to just over 19,000 incidents in 2007. Although there was a slight drop in 2008 to around 17,800 reported incidents of family violence, over 17,000 incidents in a country with only a population of 4.4 million, and taking into account reporting abuse is extremely unpopular, these statistics are much too high. In my opinion, the initiative with ending domestic violence against women and children needs to start early. Older men will not be nearly as likely to change their ways as young boys. For this reason, change must begin with the younger generation. One program by the name of Young Men as Allies is working to prevent violence and conflict in the Western Balkans, including Serbia, Croatia, Kosovo, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. The project aims to work with young men in resolving and working with the challenges they face, specifically regarding social and cultural norms around masculinity. This program specializes in addressing these gender norms while promoting gender equality. Young men are facing challenges in confronting outbursts of violence, which are results of trying to prove manhood and masculinity. Project goals are targeted at a male youth base, ages 14 to 18, and works on discouraging violent behavior against community, women, and peers. As a nation, we need to continue encouraging change within young people. More programs like this one need to be funded and implemented all throughout the world, but especially in patriarchal societies like the Balkans. I am proud to say major progress has occurred in Croatia. Not only have there been powerful women in power like Jadranka Kosor, Croatia's first female prime minister since independence, but this trend is also continually getting stronger. Women in the Balkans are leading a revolution. They are increasingly taking top leadership positions and having high levels of authority within the country. Traditional rules are changing as Balkan countries shake off their past and move to a more equalized country. My hopes are that this continues, and that one day, when referring to political candidates, the main focus of their campaign is not their gender, but their ideals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Yara Pinhas, addressing conflicting views on women in Israel's public sphere. What do the children see? Yara?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Blanc. Thank you to Maru, my director. Thank you, Sophia, and to the guest speakers. Gender roles and its place in identity formation amongst children is a very important topic, and I am very honored to be here today to specifically talk about women in Israel. This past summer, I worked at an international camp with 60 young women from around the world, ages 14 to 16, and I led an instruction on gender and sexuality with them. And we discussed their gender roles as young women and their expectations depending on the culture and family background that they come from. One of the most interesting activities that I led was the gender spectrum, where my colleague and I would print out pictures of celebrities, professionals, and other types of people that they would know. And we asked them to place those pictures on a gender spectrum. One end was feminine, the other side was masculine. And it was fascinating to see the heated discussions that were going on between the girls, because they all came from different backgrounds, about where to place these specific people. I would love to lead gender-related activity with you guys here, but I have to talk to you. So that's what I'm going to do right now. And I'm sure that each one of you has heard about Israel on the news, and it's probably most of the time because of the political situation. I am an American, I'm also an Israeli, and I lived in Israel for over 7 years, and I want to give you an inside perspective on Israel, specifically with Jewish women. And there are many populations in Israel, and they're very important and they need to be talked about. But for today, I'm just going to talk about Jewish women. Okay? Women's place in Israel, Jewish women's place in Israel in the public sphere is conflicting, as my title of this thing is, because one, Israel's religious authorities conduct marriages and divorce and other matters pertaining to Jewish practices. So Jewish religious law, or halakha, limits women's rights. Secondly, Israel is a democratic state, and in its 1948 Declaration of Independence, it states that it will uphold the full social and political equality of all its citizens without distinction of race, creed, or sex, and it will guarantee full freedom of religion, conscience, education, and culture, and will safeguard the sanctity of the holy places of all religions. So one of the most interesting questions to me is how Jewish is Israel? Meaning, what Jewish laws does Israel prescribe and follow, and hence what types of discrimination do its citizens tolerate? Israel's ultra-Orthodox Jewish community has gained popularity throughout the past years in parliament, but also in the public sphere. And there is discrimination that is going on in the public sphere. In certain areas, one will see signs on the sidewalk that designate that one sidewalk is for men and the other sidewalk is for women. And verbal abuse on public buses have been going on, and derogatory words have been used towards women. And I would like to mention very quickly 3 examples of these instances. In 2011, an 8-year-old Orthodox girl named Naama was spat on and insulted by an ultra-Orthodox man while walking to school. The men called her a prostitute because her dress was not as long as it should have been. Additionally, in 2011, a 28-year-old secular woman, Tanya, was forced to move to the back of an inner-city public bus by an ultra-Orthodox man. The man verbally insulted her along with about 10 other men who were outside the bus and would not let the bus continue its route. Tanya posted on her Facebook this statement: "The reason I am posting this story is not to declare that Orthodox Jews are pure evil. I want to point out that this is a social and educational problem. She did not provoke anyone and believes that some people in the Orthodox community are using religion in discriminatory ways." Since 2011, women have continuously been told to move to the back of the bus in certain areas in Israel. Women that aren't religious have also been targeted, and they also are terrified of this, and so they just move back to the bus because they don't want anyone to tell them to move back to the bus. So it's become sort of a norm. And if you Google any of this, you can see that a lot of the news reports title this as the Rosa Parks story of Israel, which I think is very interesting. The most recent incident happened 2 weeks ago on February 17th. Noah, a 22-year-old woman, traveled from Tzfat to Ashdod and was yelled at and cursed at by 2 ultra-Orthodox men. She refused to move to the back of the bus, and the men were arrested. In response to this incident 2 weeks ago, the newly elected member of the Knesset, the member of the parliament, Yael Berman, said, "It's time that the law defines segregation of women as a crime. The segregation of women is a phenomenon endangering the future of Israeli society. It is the state's responsibility to stop this phenomenon from growing." So, if young girls and young women are being harassed and insulted because of their gender, just because ultra-Orthodox men believe they are violating halakha and are not Jewish, the state needs to do something, since Israel is a democratic state and it needs to uphold the rights of women. Young girls and boys in ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox community are raised to see women as restricted or confined to a certain role. And young Israeli children are being exposed to this discrimination through the media and also in the public sphere. Children like Naama and other affected children that have been affected by gender violence, they apply what they see to their ever-forming identity. And I think that this is a really important issue that Israel needs to tackle. The next topic that I wanted to talk about very shortly is women's religious freedom in Israel. Any child or person that goes to the Western Wall in Jerusalem will immediately notice the unequal divide of sections given to men and women at this holy site. Professor Shimon Shitri, who was a former minister of religious affairs in Israel, says that the law and practice in Israel regarding religious freedom may best be understood as a sort of hybrid between non-intervention in religious affairs on the one hand, and on the other, the inter-involvement of religion and government. So to highlight this, especially with the religious courts, I want to give you a personal story that when my mom and my father were getting a divorce, they had to go to religious court because the religious courts rule in Israel. And the divorce had to be done under halakha. And my mom would receive a get, which is a document stating that she is no longer married to my dad and is essentially available to marry again. The get and a divorce are only initiated by men. When my mom was in the religious court, she had no say in the procedure, and she was asked to sit down continuously because she kept on getting up because she had to leave my 2-year-old brother outside of the room. And she was completely ignored. And my mom believes that that they treated her like this to make her feel agitated and more embarrassed. And this example will be in stark contrast to what's going on now with the Women of the Wall, because the movement of the Women of the Wall encourages women to speak up and to have their rights not ignored. So the Women of the Wall movement, which started in 1988, challenges the state-supported religious institutions and religious norms in Israel. The Western Wall is a physical wall from the Second Temple period in Jerusalem. It is the holiest site for Jewish people in the world, and the wall is not only a remnant of ancient Jewish history, but it is a symbol of survival of the Jewish people. Since Israel regained control of the wall in 1967, the wall has been separated by a separation wall, men on one side, women on the other side. Jewish people from all over the world come to the wall, they pray, they mourn, they celebrate at all hours of the day. And men are allowed to read from the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and wear their ritual garments. However, women are only allowed to pray out of their prayer books. The Women of the Wall's mission is, quote, to achieve the social and legal recognition of our right as women to wear prayer shawls, pray, and read from the Torah collectively and out loud at the Western Wall. Furthermore, they wish to educate Jewish women and the public about the social, political, and personal ramifications of limiting and eliminating women's right to pray as a group at a holy site. When the law and the society literally, publicly, and deliberately silence women in prayer, it is a violation of civil rights, human rights, and religious freedoms. Education is the key to changing perspective, laws, and lives, end quote. Most of the Women of the Wall's advocates are non-Israeli, and I think that's really interesting. They are Jewish women from America predominantly and other countries, and I believe that more Israeli women, secular, Orthodox, conservative, whoever they may be, need to get involved because children learn about the Western Wall in their textbooks. They see pictures of the wall in their textbooks. They see this divide, and they grow with this knowledge that the wall has always been separated, and that is not true. The wall only became separated when Israel gained control of it in 1967. Let me skip here. 4 minutes. And because of what I just said, the segregation on the buses and also the segregation at the wall, I think I want you to ponder the thought with the participation of women in Israel through the government, the IDF, and also in the parliament. Israel is a democratic, pluralistic state, and women have been in the army for the past 64 years in high positions. And women worked alongside men in Israel's founding. They broke sexism in Israel when women were shoveling and building Israel. And women had the right to vote long before women in America could have the right to vote during the Zionist Congresses, the first one in 1897. And Golda Meir was the 4th Prime Minister of Israel, and she was the first ambassador to the Soviet Union. She was a labor minister, she was a foreign minister, etc. And in the recent elections that happened in Israel this past month, 6 more women were elected to the parliament. So now there are 27 women in the parliament out of 120. And I think that these few examples, in light of what's going on with discrimination on the religious end, We need to try and fix the religious discrimination because we have so many advancements in Israel of women. So the freedom that women have to participate in modern Israeli society clashes with the actions to push women to the sidelines, not to be heard at the Western Wall and not to be seen on buses. And this religious tension has been going on since Israel's founding. In 1947, Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, he wrote a letter to the chairman of the Jewish Agency, and he said that the Jewish state will guarantee marital affairs, the Sabbath, and education, and kashrut in the Jewish state, noting that the Jewish state will guarantee freedom of conscience for all its citizens and makes it clear that we have no intention of establishing a theocratic state. This status quo agreement provided a framework for the Jewish nature of Israel. But he realized, this is the last sentence, but he realized that the difficulty of creating a Jewish state was that the religious questions and the disputes would be to the future generations. And what I want to say is that we are the future generation. As a child growing up in Israel, hearing the discrimination that my mom experienced at the religious courts, seeing the discrimination on the buses, seeing it at the wall, a holy site of mine, I think that children need to be at the forefront of this change and change the perceptions of women in Israel.
Thank you very much.
Very well done.
I want to thank the panel, and I want to ask anybody who has any questions for anybody on the panel, but please state your name and where you're from and your organization. So please, if anybody has any questions to ask anybody on the panel, please feel free. We'd like to open up and have an interactive discussion. Or you have comments to make. Does anybody have anything to say? Go ahead, honey.
This question is for Dr. Sarah.
Sarah Aaron. Not a doctor, but thank you.
I'll take it because you sound like it. How do you make available information about all of these programs? Because they sound terrific, but I must tell you that I have 5 kids on different ages, never heard of any one of them. My kids go to private schools, parochial schools, and public schools. Mm-hmm. And that is your demographic target.
Yeah, here in New York?
Here in New York City, in Manhattan, there is a couple of schools that I particularly, by my own personal experience, think that they need tremendously to have access to these kind of programs where bullying and abuse and all of these things are happening to the girls and to some boys.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. Well, so I guess one online. So there are, some of the things I mentioned, and I think the PowerPoint is available. There are handouts, and you can look them up.
There's some over there, some of the handouts.
So the problem is, or part of the problem is, a lack of funding. So the Relationship Abuse Prevention Program that I mentioned is a New York City program. They have multiple sites throughout the city at certain public schools, but not all public schools have them. And for the last several years, we've had to do yearly fights to get them to reinstate the funding. So every year it's save rap, because they're getting ready to cut that because it's optional. It's not math and science and reading. And so we're sort of up against, every time we try to get into a school, we're pushing against the more necessary skills that they think the students need to have. If the kids can't pass their Regents exams, they don't need to have healthy relationship education. It's sort of the short answer to part of the problem. And I think that the programs exist, and we try to advertise ourselves, but New York City is big, and all of our programs are relatively small in comparison. So the city-based programs I'm mentioning, our staff now is about a staff of 10 at our program, but in the past we've been more like 5 or 6. Like, this is the biggest my program has ever been, and other programs are working with similar numbers. So that is sort of the short answer. But there are resources, and please reach out to me. I can try to help you connect.
Can I ask you something, Sarah? Maybe you can send an email to me, and I could send it to Christina. We could send it to Lily and everybody else with this information, and I think it would be useful, the name of these organizations.
Yeah, the organizations are listed in the PowerPoint, so if there are copies that people can take.
There are some copies in the back.
Yeah, it's all in there. But yeah, if there's other things people are looking for, I can certainly send that.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have any wonderful questions? Lily, thank you. That was very good. Does anybody else have questions or statements that they want to make to the panel or anything they want to say? Yes, and please tell me, please stand and tell us where you're from and your organization.
Okay, Dr. Petronila Iloi from Tanzania. I came here under the Liverpool Women International Association. I represent the Near East and African region. Yeah, I just want to make a general comment because when I hear of the presentations and the previous presentations, it seems like, gender-based violence, whether it's for girls or boys, is global. The phenomena is more or less the same. So I keep on asking myself, where do we go wrong? Maybe we should start, for example, those who are in institutions or schools, we should start the Parent Teachers Association. See if parents, they can start teaching the boys to respect the girls, maybe right from home. It might help because we can have the good policies and guidelines in place. But if the respect does not start at home from the grassroots, then it is very difficult. We could also use religious leaders to talk to fathers so that the fathers talk to their sons, so that we start building this good relationship from the very family level as the smallest unit in any national institution to see how we can tackle with it, because it's a very serious and complicated problem, because it starts from psychological trauma. We have cultures like in Africa where a young girl, when getting married, is the one who is coached to be a good wife, to do all the good things for the husband, for the family, for the clan which she is going to be married to. But the young man is not being taught to be a good husband. To be a recipient of those good things which the young girl is being taught to offer. So sometimes the offerings of the good wife ends in a negative recipient, and hence the continuation of the violence at a very tender age. In my country now, the Roman Catholic Church, they've started a special session before a young couple gets married. They go into a seminar. It's a 3-month seminar whereby everybody, they get an experience, elderly people who give them about the life cycles of marriage. They get a legal person who teach them their legal rights, both the husband and the wife. They get a religious teaching, what the Bible guides the respect of the husband and wife. They get a psychologist, whereby the husband also has to understand when the woman is pregnant and she changes behavior, how to treat her. So seeing if maybe it can help, we don't know. But then we need to start somewhere and see what can work, because the problems are many, complicated, and the solutions are also more of the similar setup, complicated. How do we work about, how do we solve these problems? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I just want to add to something that you said, because many years ago I was invited to Burkina Faso, northern Ghana, and Mali to talk about education of the girl child. But everything you said has to stem from the mother, the father, tribal leaders, religious leaders, and it's a series of different events that have to take place. Also for the girl child to understand, even if she gets a meal at school, it's a way for her to go to school and not do chores. So these are some of the things that were put into effect to get the girl child to be educated. And also with religious leaders to teach the father. First they would meet separately with the mother, then the father, then the child, the tribal leaders, the religious leaders, for each person to understand the effects that would happen if they're not taught the right thing. And we would not have a sustainable society in any society of the world. So bravo for what you said, because I was part of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to compliment. I think the program on young married couples is excellent. We should have this here. Most people get married without any advice about what to do when it happens. And then you only have after the fact effects. But I would caution a tiny bit about presuming that the grown-ups know best. Because unfortunately, my experience is that most grown-ups in that part of the world have already basically practicing those same things. I mean, there may be very good people who do not, but the general culture around them will encourage them to do sometimes uneven action against the girls. I mean, it's a question of knowing how much do you believe the adults would be able to act. And that's where I think with the adults, it needs to be comprehensive, whatever one does. And it needs to involve as many people in the society as possible. But what this panel was trying to do is to tell you, listen to the children, because they are the newer ones on the block, the less damaged, in a sense, by the surrounding, the less incorporated in the surrounding society. And so they may be the ones who can take the innovative step. Look at what is happening with the gay movement. Here in this country, the young people are old for equality for gays. The older people are not. Predominantly because it's an unaccustomed thought. They have been taught otherwise, they have lived otherwise, and it's more difficult to change at that point. And the same is certainly true with reactions to immigration in this country. So there are some indicators that would tell you that it might be easier to start at a younger age. Now, if you go into the website of GEMS, they will give you all kinds of ideas about what to do in the schools. And I agree, everybody else needs to be put on board as you go along. But that's a good place to begin, opening a window. And that was my comment.
I believe there was a gentleman that raised their hand. Please stand up and let us know where you're from and the organization. And it's nice to hear a man for gender equality. Thank you.
Yes, well, my name is Dave Michael. I'm a recent graduate at Human Rights from the University of London and currently volunteering for UNGO CSWs and coordinating these events for the past 2 weeks. My question is directed to Ms. Pinhas. Pinhas, okay. And it's a very interesting focus that you have given your background and the country that you are from. I'm curious to find out from you how women have been portrayed, I guess, to those that associate with Palestinian women, men, or children. Has Israeli society treated them even worse than the current status that you portrayed it, or I guess I'll let you find out.
I didn't want to talk about politics. Are you saying in the media or?
No, well, okay.
How?
You I guess spoke about how your society, Israeli society has portrayed Israeli
Jewish women, yeah.
I mean, for those women that end up, associated to Palestinian men, women, or children during their everyday life, and I guess Israeli men, in this case, find out that these women have been associated to Palestinian men, women, or children. Has their perception and treatment for these women changed if they associate with the other side?
Okay. You're asking how do men in Israel feel about women, Palestinian women specifically?
No, I mean Israeli women. Right.
How do Israeli women feel about?
Yeah, have you come across any of that during your time over?
I don't know where to begin. I mean, I've encountered very interesting situations in Israel between Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis, Christian Israelis. Discrimination is everywhere. In any community, you're going to find some sort of discrimination. I'm not going to talk about the politics that go on with Palestinian women, especially during with the checkpoints and stuff. I don't know enough about it. I did not do the army. I don't know anything that goes on there. Specifically with the Jewish religious community, they have their own buses. They have their own bus line. So segregation can happen on those bus lines. I focused on the public buses, and the segregation still exists there. And the government needs to do something about it because it's public buses. And that shouldn't happen. I don't know enough about segregation of women in the Arab, Muslim, Israeli population to speak confidently about it. So I don't want to say just anything. If maybe you could give me like a more precise question, I could answer it. But I don't want to say anything that someone will quote me and whatever. But that's okay.
She's a wise lady.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything that they want to say to the panel or make statements or any questions? Please feel free to open up.
I wanted to make an additional comment, but there may be others. No, please go ahead.
To Roseanne Flores, and I'm part of the NGO for the Rights of the Child as well. So one of the questions I have is youth with youth, right? So we're focusing on youth, but youth also have children. So what they've learned about violence is what they've been taught from their interactions with others. So can you all address that? So, you're a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old who has the 3-year-old, right?
And they're just kids having kids.
Yeah, but it happens.
Often. I can jump on that unless somebody else
Please, no, go right ahead.
I immediately saw faces of past clients as you asked that question. I guess it's sort of, what I'm going to say is sort of contradictory. It's an and both, right? Like on some level, it's not any different, and on some level, it is. I think we see lots of parents who are 15 to 21-year-old parents, and I think sometimes I think it's an interesting conversation. It definitely opens the door. So some of the young people I've worked with who are parenting. Suddenly, a 16-year-old woman who has a 2-year-old son thinks about men very differently, thinks about gender in a way she never thought about before, because now she's realizing she's going to need to raise this child and provide some information to that child about what is or isn't healthy about men and women and all of that stuff. So I think if we're able to sort of gain access to that young person like we want to, then I think there's opportunity for things to be very positive for that child, and for that child, the young child, to learn something very different than their parent did. And I think the challenge is always things, kind of like Dr. Blanc was saying earlier, things becoming hardwired too soon. That the sooner we can get to a young person, the better our chances are of them still being in a place where they're willing and able and interested to learn something different or to question what they've been told so far. So I think sometimes it's very promising, and at other times, being 16 and a mother and trying to, support yourself and support a child and deal with the fact that maybe your ex-partner and the father of that child has been abusive to you. Like, sometimes dealing with all of that means you can't deal with this, and so, or at least not right now. So I think it's also, we have to kind of make priorities and choices. And did that sort of answer your question?
It is, but it's also, they're the next generation, right? So if we're trying to break the cycle, and you have the 15-year-old who has the 3-year-old who develop mentally themselves, and their brains are still developing too, it's sort of the question that we're having, which is how do we work with families, right? To work with children. Well, they're the family.
Right.
So it almost seems like that would have to be addressed.
And I'd love to see, there are some programs that do that mother-child work, and I'm not familiar enough with sort of what their curriculum is to know, but I would love to think that that's something that can be addressed in those types of programs.
Yeah, I would like to add something. As a mom, I did share my story already, but I also had mentioned I'm divorced. I was in a marriage where I wasn't treated equally or fairly, and it was a very religious marriage, and the man was the head of the house, and I was to submit. And, you know, for a while I did go along with that, but then there were things going on that my husband was doing that just, it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair to me. And I did speak up. We tried to go to counseling, and he'd say, well, you know, you're the wife, you need to submit and pray, things will change. You know, honestly, I did get some legal help, and I wound up getting a divorce. And the reason I say this is, I know it's important to have programs that will follow up, but I also think it is important as a mother to take responsibility for yourself, for your children, and think long term, even if it goes against what maybe people around you might be saying, I want better for myself, for my children, realizing your children are watching you and going to model after you. The mother has a responsibility to fight for herself, for her rights, the rights for her children as well. My daughters, I believe, have turned out the way that they have because they have seen the choices that I've made and are following my example. And I'm not saying it's the easy road. And like, you know, I've gone through a lot with family and relatives that things that I shouldn't have, but I know in my heart I've done the right thing. And I just believe that when it comes to teaching, that it really needs to be something that starts at home. If you can reach the mothers and help empower them and support them to make decisions, even if it's tough, help them to, if they have to get out of a relationship that isn't going to change, that in which they're getting hurt, their children are getting hurt, help them to get out of that cycle, or encourage them, and then they will be that example for their children, and their children will grow up, and their children will have that in their mind. And I'm not brushing the responsibility off men, but I'm saying the change, I believe, has to start with us as women, as mothers.
I think that's very important. But what you were talking about that struck me was that what made you force a change was that you knew in your heart that it was unjust. Right. Basically, you were following a human rights path. You knew that it was unjust. And that's where we need to tap. We need to tap the children, realizing how unjust their behaviors to their other gender is, making them think as if they were a little girl and what it means to receive that kind of behavior. You need to tap that inner core. And that's what human rights does. So I don't think you're contradicting. I'm saying that it's part of the path of opening this up. And by God, I think developed countries like this country and similar ones would really need to start putting it in the regular schooling. It should be part of the curriculum. It should teach how to behave with the other gender, because we know it still is a big problem in this country. I have no illusions. My country is Italy. I can tell you it's an horrendous problem in Italy. I've lived with it as a young girl. It's getting worse. They're getting killed, like India, because the economic pressures are causing death, domestic violence to increase and become more serious. And we have deaths of partners, female partners, every day in the Italian newspapers. It has increased. So, you know, it is out there, and those developed countries that speak so well about human rights in other contexts should really put their money where their heart is and make a difference. Then we will not have to do it backwards all the time. So that's where what I was trying, you know, and connecting these various trends.
To kind of go off what you were saying, I think it's important that we start with kids, but make sure it's something they bring home as well, because kids definitely model after their parents. The values instilled, going off what you were saying, the values instilled in you at a very young age when you're not entirely sure what's going on surrounding you. What you see is what you do. Kindergarten kids fighting with kids in their class, they don't do that because they're malice, they do that because of other reasons. It's not a conscious
Bring
decision.
it at home.
Exactly.
Open
So
the
I think-
discussion.
Exactly.
Make the parents reflect.
So I think
if they
a
need
huge-
to.
a
In
huge-
some cases they
if
don't.
we want to reach the younger generation, we need to establish that it is an issue at home and kind of bring that into homes, even however uncomfortable the topic may be. There's more problems. Domestic violence is a huge problem that people don't do just on their own prompting. It's something they see, it's something they're witnessing around them, so they reflect it. So it needs to be handled with both parents and children, and it needs to start happening today, tomorrow. It needs to be a discussion
really
at a
believe
dinner
that.
table. It needs to be discussions at dinner tables. Groups like yours need to prompt conversation, just not only in school, because it's not a problem solely in school.
I also want to say something.
But you can tell,
Also-
you'll be able to tell your parents, my parents are behaving properly. You can congratulate them if they don't manifest these behaviors.
Also, I want to say something to your question, what you said. When you have, some of these kids are younger than 15 having children. So we don't know the families. Most of them, they came from dysfunctional families themselves. So they really have not had any role model to look for and how to treat. So what happens? Their own children are abused just like they were. So the cycle then continues. This has to change. Has to change. The rights of the child has to be given in every single language in the world. And it has to be taught early. When I used to teach kids, and I trained them for Model UN, I said, you each take a right of this child. And you tell me, if you are ahead of a country, what would you change, what would you do to make a difference? If you don't answer me, you're not going to the UN. And they wrote articles and articles for them to understand what it is their rights and what can they do to change something. A lot of times you can write, if a child writes to a president of a country, that president will answer that child fiercer than he will answer to you or me. Governments respond to children. Christina and I had the privilege of being at the UN when the president of Ecuador spoke. And they changed the voting right to 16 years old for children to have a say. Brazil just did the same. This is very, very important for children to understand their rights, even through their families. Even if the family is abusing them, they can say, this right is this, and I have a right. I have a right to speak. I have a right to love. I have a right to inalienable rights. I have a right to dignity. I have a right to education. I have a right to health. I have a right not to be discriminated against. And this can be fought in a way of being verbal, not by putting on boxing gloves, by doing it in a very intelligent manner globally. I know what goes on in Africa. I've been to Africa many times. The child has no rights. The woman has no rights. Even here, the U.S. has not signed any of the conventions. Not the right of the child, nothing. Just the optional protocol. But we can make a difference and a change by also addressing governments. Because without addressing the governments, the change cannot be effective. We have to make them responsible as NGOs and civil society. We have to make them accountable. And so if a child comes out bad, it's part of the government for not also training adults and giving the message clearly across. And we need to give that message globally with the rights of the child in every single language and taught in classrooms and taught to the mothers, taught to the religious leaders, taught to the fathers, so they understand. They don't understand. This is the problem. And this is what I feel should really be done to change.
We agree, and we should do more, and please create the groundswell. We need a groundswell here.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and there are some copies of the speeches in the back.
I need to about you.
Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you guys.